So in this video we are going to be continuing to take a look at a scenario where civilization starts over. We are now on episode 28 of the series, and in the last episode we saw a few pretty major events happen. One of the most major events we saw was the full, colonization of South America. We also saw colonization pretty much everywhere actually. And in this episode we are going to be beginning to lead up to a pretty major event that will be taking place in a few episodes, and we're going to start to see some pieces fall into place. So if you do end up enjoying this video, please make sure to like and subscribe, and let's get straight into it. So the very first thing we're going to be doing is going up here to North America. I think it's about time this whole continent is fully colonized. We see a lot of exploration take place in these Canadian islands right up here, and all of Greenland is like encircled, and because it's literally just ice over here, I'm going to do it in as fully discovered. We also have these final areas of northern Russia be explored, and now it's kind of just Antarctica that's undiscovered, as it's kind of hard to go down there, I guess. But for the most part, the entire world is going to be fully explored, except for, as I did just say, Antarctica, so let me just colour that in. So, yes, most of the world is now fully explored. So let's go ahead and see how some of this land is going to be divided up. And we're going to be focusing on Siberia and North America, but we're also going to see something happening down here as well. So in North America, we can see that the straight line curse is now taking place, as this border right here is drawn with a straight line. And then the Swedish kind of just... And then for this part of the border, the Swedish are kind of just going to follow along with this very convenient river. And all of this land right here is going to be taken, and as well as this, all of these Canadian islands up here are going to be colonized by the Swedish, as well as Greenland. Now Greenland isn't fully explored, I guess, but it is like kind of fully known about, so I will be colouring it in all as the Swedish colony. Next up we move over to Alaska, where a pretty interesting deal is going to be taking place. Hokkaido is going to be getting all of this land over here as well as these islands. They don't get this part of Russia though, because that's going to be divided up in just a second. And the rest of it is going to be going over to Indonesia. So Indonesian Alaska now exists. That is a very weird sentence. And with that taking place, all of North America and all of the Americas for that matter are officially colonized. Next up, moving over to Siberia, we are going to be seeing a little bit of this land taken up, however nowhere near all of it is going to be taken. Moving over to Hokkaido, they are going to be finishing off the last parts of their colonies. They take a little bit of this Siberian land up to this river. They had been taking some land previously, but with the technology advancing, it's becoming more possible to take over this land. For reference, we are probably in the 1830s, maybe late 1830s, early 1840s right now, and by this time in real life, all of this land was taken anyway. Over here, the Russians are going to be taking this land right here, as well as this group of islands, although it's kind of hard to get there, you just have to walk across the ice, I guess. Next up, over here we see a very large expansion take place, and that is going to be by the Volga country. And they are going to be taking over all of this land right here, a very large claim. We then see the pink team make a move, they take this land, and that's probably going to be it for them. They have transitioned from a Kazakh country to a southern Russian country, I guess. That's pretty interesting to see. Over here, the Tomato, or Manchurian country rather, they do take a very small amount of land, however, really not too much. They're not too bothered on taking this. Next up, we move over to Sakhalin. They are going to be taking this land right here, making their country quite weirdly shaped, I'm not going to lie. And finally, we're actually going to be seeing a new country pop up over here, and that is going to be this very small, purple country right over here. These guys are basically just formed from a group of people who wanted to move up here because it's, free land, I guess. Not exactly the best place to live, however, they do decide to set up their country right over here. So as we can see now, a lot more of the world is being colonized. We're starting to get to the point where there's really not too much land left to take. And now we're going to be moving over to Oceania. First off, Indonesia is going to be moving over, and they're going to be taking some of these islands right here. And now with barely any land left to take over in the Americas, or none in fact, the Indonesians are going to kind of go in heavily on Australia. But they're actually not going to be the only country we see, as a new player is going to take place in Australia, and that is actually going to be a European country. And who else but the French? So the French, with them kind of losing out on their American colony, are going to be looking to take some other land somewhere else, and they see this area over here as a prime location. So using their colony down here in Namibia as kind of like a point to move from, they set up a colony first in Tasmania, then they decide to take over New Zealand and some of these islands right there, as well as these islands over here, and these random Pacific islands that probably 2 people live on in total. And after that, they're actually going to be starting a colony in Australia, and it's going to be following this river, and they'll be having a very large colony, I guess. Now, one thing to note, of course, with Australia basically being a massive desert, it's not too valuable. However, they're kind of just taking it for the prestige and because no one else is claiming it. Also, France has a little bit of issue with prisoners. Their prisons are kind of full, and this is sort of similar to what we saw in real life with the UK. So the French are going to be setting up this colony right over here. But anyway, moving away from colonisation, we are now going to be seeing our first war taking place this episode. So, in the Indian Ocean, there has been a pretty interesting dynamic taking place, and that has been kind of a rivalry between India and Indonesia. These two are the dominant powers in the Indian Ocean, and they make up the largest portion of trade. Now, it used to be Indonesia, they were the dominant power. However, with India now setting up colonies all over the place, they have a colony in Arabia, they have a colony in Madagascar and in Africa, and they have one over here kind of rivaling the Indonesian Australian colony. India has really been on the rise, and Indonesia has kind of been falling off. They did manage to make up for this with this very large colony in the Americas, and this is kind of a different way of the Europeans like trading with these countries. Like, instead of going to the Indian Ocean, you can now go over here. But where am I going with this? Well, Indonesia is seeing they're kind of falling off in the Indian Ocean, which is still very important at this time. In fact, even today in our modern world, the Indian Ocean is very important. And they see a very good way to combat India. And that just happens to be this little rose pink country right over here. The Indonesians see, oh, maybe if we make a landing here, maybe that could like rival India. So these guys decide to invade this tiny little country, and all of a sudden, this Cold War has become quite hot, as there are they're directly bordering each other actually, and Indonesia has kind of just struck back here. So the Indonesians are going to be setting this up as a colony, but that's actually not going to be all. Over here in Africa, there is a very small gap left of unclaimed coastal land, and the Indonesians are going to be moving in to take it, and this is going to be further rivaling India. Now, just one thing, this Kenyan, Tanzanian country is kind of similar, so I am going to be darkening their colour just a little bit like that. But the Indonesians, they do set up a colony right over here. So yeah, we can see that a growing rivalry is taking place. But now we're going to be moving over here to Arabia, because something else is going to be taking place. So over here, this UAE sort of country, they had been previously invaded by India, and well, Qatar, they had come to the aid of the UAE country. However, it had eventually resulted in an Indian victory, and the Indians took over a very large portion of this land. We can kind of see the remnants of this through the religion map. They used to have all of this land down here. But now a new country is once again going to be threatening the UAE, and that is of course going to be Persia right here. So Persia is looking to expand their influence, and they see this UAE country as a very good way to do so. They could probably then have full access and control to the Persian Gulf, and that would kind of screw over some nations like Qatar and Mesopotamia, but they don't really care about that. They're just focusing on gaining strength. So the Persians are going to be landing on the very the tip right over here, and they're going to be quickly moving towards the capital. However, one thing that they did not take into account is something that happened in the Indian War with the UAE, and that is the defensive pact between the UAE and Qatar. That had been the reason why Qatar had joined the war with India, and this defensive pact actually still exists. These two nations guarantee each other's independence. So with Persia making a landing right here in the UAE, Qatar is going to be declaring war on Persia, stating, hey, we are still in a defensive pact with these guys, and we don't like what you're doing, we don't like this expansionism, so yeah, we're not letting it happen. So this is going to kind of concern Persia just a little bit, However, they will still see immense success. They will fully wipe out the UAE country, and then they decide to be the first one to make a move. They will move over here into Qatar. So, the Persians will be beginning an invasion into Qatar right here, and they do decently at first actually. They take over this major city right here, and then they begin to advance towards the peninsula. However, at this point, the Qatari military has been fully set up, and they are ready to go over here and fight back against the Persians. These Qatari forces do decently, however, the Persian military is actually rather strong. If you were to do like a power scaling, I would say Persia would be quite a bit stronger than Qatar. The only issue is they are fighting on Qatari soil, so these guys do know the terrain just a little bit better. However, Persia will still be making an advance down. They manage to encircle a lot of forces right over here as they meet up with the Indian border, and these guys are squeezed out. And after this, the Persians are just going to be rolling straight through into Qatar. Now this war is going extremely well for Persia as they get very close to cutting off the Qatar Peninsula from the rest of the mainland, like extremely close. Like this is very bad for these guys. And I'm sure the rest of this war is just going to go extremely well for Persia. Oh, well, I say it would go well for Persia. However, Mesopotamia, seeing what the Persians are trying to do here, this would kind of hurt them, as I said before, as it would limit trade access. They decide, okay, yeah, we're going to go to war. We are going to be going to war with Persia because we want to not only defend Qatar, which we are very friendly with, and we also want to stop Persia as well. So these Mesopotamian forces, which are some of the best trained soldiers in the world, Mesopotamia has a very good military program. These forces are going to be moving right into Persia, and they are going to be using some more modern warfare tactics to capture quite a few of these major cities. They even capture Tehran, which is the actual most populated city in Persia despite it not being their capital. And this land over here is going to fall. At this point, Persia starts to freak out and they do retreat a lot of forces over here from Qatar. And they decide to use these forces to push back against Mesopotamia. They do decently, however, this bottom area of the front is the most defended, as it is quite close to the Mesopotamian capital. But despite these pushes back, this does distract Persia a very large amount, and Qatar is going to easily make an advance back. At this point, we're actually going to see a new country join in on the war. These guys are basically just looking to take land, and that is going to be the brown Pakistani country right over here. I might just call these guys like West and East Pakistan because that's essentially this country right here, or just Pakistan. You know what, stop the app, I'm just going to call it Pakistan. So Pakistan is going to be launching an invasion in, and basically just, for what I said, these guys are looking to take some free land. They absolutely storm straight into the country, and yeah, it goes extremely well for them, as at this point Persia is basically collapsing. Qatar then moves into this land right over here and basically restores the UAE country, just like so. And they then decide to make a landing in southern Persia. They take over this island right over here, and then they just breeze right around. They decide to conduct an encircling movement with the Pakistani country right over here. So these forces move across. They also send out a special force to capture this city right down here and encircle all this land. And the encirclement goes successful, as there is really no reason for it to fail. Persia at this point is just getting completely outnumbered. The Mesopotamian forces now absolutely breeze through. They just go and just capture all of these major cities. It's just extremely easy for them. The Persian military at this point is extremely disorganized. And after these Qatari forces move down the coast and capture this city and start to approach the capital, the Persians are going to be surrendering, as their king is just like, okay, yeah, no thanks, we're good, and we're just going to leave the war. So let's go ahead and take a look at this peace treaty. So in this peace treaty here, we can see some pretty basic land division takes place. The Mesopotamians will be taking this land right here. The Pakistani country will be taking this land right here. And that is basically it. Persia has kind of become an interesting shaped country after this. Another thing that happens is the UAE gets this island, and that kind of gives them the full control over the entrance to the Persian Gulf, I guess. And they are of course going to be very fair with it, because why wouldn't they? Next up, we are going to be moving over here to Asia, because there's going to be another war taking place pretty much instantly after that one. Of course, these two wars have no correlation with each other. This one doesn't cause this one over here, but we're going to be seeing a war, or more so just an invasion. So the light blue team over here decides to go after this green country, and they launch an invasion, and it goes extremely easy. I mean, just take a look at the province layer. Just these guys, they're very new, and as you can tell, they don't really have that many people living there. So these guys are going to be storming through, just absolutely slapping around this country. They managed to capture the capital like very quickly. We also see Bangladesh get in on this just a little bit for, once again, like another war we saw just a second ago, free land, and the country is going to be surrendering. So let's go ahead and take a look at this very simple peace treaty. Okay, so for this I was going to give Bangladesh some land, but the peace treaty looked like ass, so I'm just going to give all of the land to this blue Chinese country right over here. And these guys expand a very large amount. They don't really become unstable from this because, as I said, there's barely anyone living here, so it's a very simple annexation. Now, one thing that is pretty interesting, these guys are a religious-based government. I believe that's a theocracy, and if we take a look at the religion layer, we can see that the land that they just annexed is a different religion, so it'll be pretty interesting to see what they do there. I'm sure they won't do anything concerning with the people. No, they wouldn't do that. They're better than that. But next up, we're going to be moving back over to Siberia because the second wave of division is going to be taking place up here. And this is basically just going to finish off this land. So I think an important thing to note here, this isn't all happening instantly. This is probably me speeding it up. Most likely this would take place over the course of like this episode and maybe the next, maybe like halfway through the next episode. We are in probably the 1840s now, but I don't know how long this land would take to be divided up. But anyway, the rest of this land is going to go over to the purple country right over here, and I'm actually thinking about changing their colour. I don't know how well it meshes with the rest. I think this light turquoise colour works pretty well, and that is what we're going to be seeing for the division of Siberia. And the final thing we see happening is going to be over here in Africa. So, Africa at this point is still, for the most part, unclaimed. I would say only about 15% of Africa is actually colonised. And a few of these European powers, they see, okay, so the Americas are filled up now. What about all of this land over here? So the final event we're going to be seeing is a few nations decide to come together, and we'll be looking at this in the next episode, but a few nations will be coming together to see how they could peacefully divide up this African land. But that is actually going to be it for this episode. If you did enjoy, please make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.